When you first start adding tasks to OmniFocus, you're going to run into the metadata for a task pretty quick. It's where a lot of the core of how you indicate which task needs to be where, when, and what you need to do with it. It's the part that helps you separate things out into manageable lists. So it's important to understand all of the metadata around a task and what it means for you. So if we look at the task that I have selected here, write reading books. So I'm going to write an article about reading books. And obviously in the top right of the metadata in our inspector is the title for that tasks. And you can edit it either in this side box over here. You can go over to the main list and edit it there. OmniFocus is pretty good about giving you multiple ways to edit that data. But for me, I mainly do this from the center and just type it in there, just right in the middle of my list. And whenever it gets into like deciding the project and the context, it really just kind of depends on where I'm at and how I'm working at that time as far as which I want to use. Are my hands on the keyboard at the time? Do I happen to have my hand on the mouse? It just kind of depends on which particular input device I'm using at that moment. But I really like having the flexibility of being able to choose and go back and forth between those. The next section down is this actions section where you can indicate the specific project for the task. You can indicate the context for it. You can flag it, or you can mark it complete by hitting this drop down right here. I don't ever use that. I always end up just hitting the space bar or clicking the checkbox there at the end of the task. But it's pretty simple, pretty basic. You can set the project, set the context, flag it, and go on from there. The one thing I will note about that is that when you're assigning the project or the context, you very rarely have to type in the whole thing. You can just type in some of the single letters that go with it. Like if I wanted to assign this to a different project, I can type in, for example, HCSA and know that that gets my house and car single actions list. Same thing, like if I wanted to get my daily review, I know that it's on the checklist. I can do CDR, so I know it's in the checklist folder. It's called daily review. That's typically how I type those in. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to put them where they belong. So I'm going to put it back in where it belongs, and I'll leave it right here. Going down to the next section is dates. This is where there's one piece here I don't use, and that's the estimated time. I keep trying to use it. I just learned that I'm really bad at estimating time. I could put in the time I want for a given project, run some scripts, and calculate how much time I have allocated on my list or on my dashboard. I just find that I don't use it. Some people love it, but you can put in that estimated time. You can add it to your main list of tasks that you're looking at, do all kinds of cool things with it, but it just doesn't work for me. Defer until, that's your defer date. So that's one of the key features of OmniFocus that I don't see in a lot of other applications, other task managers. But ultimately what that means is you can set a date that you want that task to be pushed off until in the future. So it won't show up on your active working lists until that date in the future. Love it. That's an awesome feature. I use it fairly regularly, and it's one that I highly recommend you get used to and try to leverage as much as you can. The flip side of that is the due date, one that I recommend you don't use hardly ever. So if you have an actual due date, you have a project with a deadline, it's on a contract, you need to put that deadline into OmniFocus. And this is where you can do that for a specific task. If a specific thing needs done by a certain day and time, it needs to go here. Do not put in arbitrary due dates. It will simply clutter the system. If you have a real due date in there mixed in amongst all these other arbitrary due dates, you'll lose it. And the next thing you know, you have a mess on your hands and you're always losing track of the things that actually need to get done and they don't get done on time. So don't do that. The completed date, you can tell it when you've completed a task. I don't ever do that. Some people like to make sure that you can have the actual completed date and times for record keeping purposes. I simply don't see the point in it. I figure if the task is done, check it off, it's done, don't worry about it ever again. This next section for repeats, I'm going to leave this for a separate video because there's a lot of intricate things that you can do there, and I think it's important enough that we'll cover it better if we put a dedicated video to it. So look for that other section. It'll be close to or next to this video in the list. The last section here is the notes field. And Some people say that you shouldn't use this because it's not really prominent in OmniFocus. To me, it's perfect. I love having it there. You can also edit this in the main list again as well. There's a lot of that you can do. But for me, I find that I use this fairly regularly. If I have, especially something on a someday maybe list, if I have a blog post idea, the title will be the title of the task, and the notes will be any supporting material I have or links that help me understand what that blog post should be about. So it's something that I do leverage fairly heavily, and if you're willing to try it out, you can also drop in a lot of shortcuts to applications or documents, those sorts of things. You can drop a lot of those into that notes field. Other links throughout OmniFocus or actual URLs to websites. You can do all kinds of stuff with that notes field to make it easier for you to do that task. But overall, that's all of the metadata save the repeat functionality, which we will go to next.